That was one of the most embarrassing displays of football we have seen all season. Conceding 5 goals in the opening 20 minutes of a match is not down to tactical naivety, it's not down to player quality, it's not down to managerial expertise. It is simply down to a lack of professionalism, which is what most people will be saying after the game. And I agree to an extent. But there were some very key tactical decisions made by Stellini this afternoon that led to Newcastle absolutely running riot at St James's. And it is a prime example of why a manager is becoming one of the most important cogs in the machine that is a football club. Now, before we go through those tactical decisions and before we react to Hugo Lloris's timid post-match interview, we first need to understand how each team stood before coming into this game.
I'm going now. I've had enough of this shit.
Firstly, sacking Conte and replacing him with his best mate isn't the answer. It never has been the answer, because despite the talent at Spurs, and there is quite a lot of talent in that dressing room, apart from Davinson Sanchez, the man that puts out the team sheet needs to have an ounce of understanding of where he's going, the team he's playing, and how to react to that. And Stellini seems to lack all three. Newcastle and Tottenham, in the broad sense of things, are actually in quite similar places. They're both trying to create a team that could reach the top 4, create a squad that can solidify their place there, and be competitive with the very best teams in the league. And yet, the only reason that their paths are crossing is because Spurs are on a rapid decline, and Newcastle are ambitious, smart, patient, and know how to progress a football club. Just over a year ago, Geordies wanted to rip their eyes out watching the fat oaf that is Steve Bruce play some of the worst football they have ever seen, whereas at Tottenham, they were as optimistic as they have ever been, bringing in a serial winner in Antonio Conte. And yet, fast forward a year and the teams are passing each other once again, and this time it's Newcastle who are dreaming of trophies and Spurs who are on a path to Steve Bruce, probably. And today at St James's, Newcastle proved that if you build a team correctly with characters that are hungry and desperate to achieve when in the past perhaps they couldn't have, under a manager that is willing to learn and is eager to compete against the very best in the league, it is that that gets you top 4 and not just spunking 150 million on players that don't even start week to week. But for now, we need to focus on that dugout and the decisions that led to that incredible first 20 minutes of football. Tottenham, for the first time this season, going into one of their most important games, decided to go with a back 4, leaving Dyer and Romero all alone at the back with 2 incredibly attack-minded fullbacks either side of them, if you can even call them that. I mean, Perisic isn't a left back. He can play left wing back because it allows for him to foray forward with the defensive 3 behind him. But defensively, he's shit. And it was Perisic's position that was crucial to Newcastle scoring multiple times in that first half. He was caught way too high up the pitch for the first. He just completely switched off for the second. He put in little to no challenge for the ball in the fifth. There's an argument that he was culpable for the third. Just a neat and tidy 20-minute performance from the Croatian. And somehow he was allowed to walk out of the changing room for the second half. Even when Tottenham decided to sit back and shut up shop, they just allowed for the freedom of St James's to be given to Guimaraes, who dictated the midfield, pop balls into the half spaces. There was no aggression from the Tottenham centre-backs to close down them spaces, which pales in comparison to the proactive back line of Newcastle, who just sat as high up as they wanted. I loved when Shah raced 20 yards forward, clattered into Son in the press, won back possession, gave the ball to Murphy, and he just released an absolute screamer into the bottom left-hand corner. That's what an effective press does. That's what proactive centre-backs do, and was an excellent example of just both of the team's attitudes. A lot of the problems in that Aston Villa game for Newcastle came in the midfield as the likes of Ramsey were able to exploit the spaces in the centre of the park, but all of that was gone in this game. I thought Willock looked really tidy on the ball, obviously had that beautiful assist for Isak to latch onto, and Isak, man, he is so clinical in front of goal. He took his chances brilliantly and will become a real threat in the coming years. Now, before we wrap up, let's quickly look at what Hugo Lloris had to say at full time.
We could not match the performance of Newcastle players. We were late in all the aspects.
I mean, there's starting slowly and then there's being 5-0 down within the first 20 minutes. But certainly that opening 20 to 25 minutes, Tottenham were not alive. They simply were not there to attack the game in the same way that Newcastle were. And again, it just shows the attitudes of both clubs. One club desperately wants to get into those Champions League places. And for Tottenham, it almost seemed like they were playing some bottom half team. It was a game that didn't really matter. Perhaps they'd already secured their place in the league. This was a huge game going into it. This was built as, you know, whichever team wins this is most likely to get that fourth spot. Apparently for Tottenham, they don't think they're going to get it either.
It's not even about talking of tactics. It's just we could not fight.
Even if you haven't got that fight in you, and in a sense, what do the Tottenham players have to fight for? The manager's not going to be there next season. The direction of the club looks clueless. So in a way, you can understand sort of why the Tottenham players don't have that hunger and desire that Newcastle do. Even if you haven't got that, just tactical competence to lean against would have helped and stopped them from being battered in the first 20 minutes and at least made them competitive with Newcastle in this game.
And it's just the difference of level today between Newcastle and Tottenham.
And that was Hugo Lloris giving his 2 cents on what exactly happened versus Newcastle. He is the captain, so I guess he did have to speak to the press, but fair play because there were other players a lot more culpable than him. But in the end, it was an afternoon that summed up the clubs perfectly. Newcastle with a thunderous start that punished every single mistake, showing their ambition to get into the top 4. And Tottenham, who were slow, tactically naive, directionless, and yet Harry Kane still scored.